concrete floor of the cellar was always freezing, retaining the relentless seeping chill of the Port Angeles, Washington weather. Outside, beyond the heavy windowless foundation of the Ashcroft estate, the rain of the Pacific Northwest was likely pouring in sheets. Alara couldn't see it, of course. She hadn't seen the natural sky, unfiltered by a cracked ventilation grate, in over a decade. At 22 years old, Alara Ashcroft looked like a ghost haunting her own life. She lay huddled on a twin-sized mattress, pushed into the darkest corner of the basement, pulling a thin moth-eaten wool blanket up to her chin. Her skin, which should have been flushed with the natural, rapid healing warmth of a werewolf, was instead the color of old porcelain, marred by a frightening network of blackened veins that spiderwebbed up her arms and neck. She was dying. She had been dying for a very long time. 4,380 days. Alara had counted every single one. She kept the tally scratched into the concrete wall behind her mattress with a rusty nail she'd found years ago. Each mark represented 24 hours of darkness, hunger, and the monthly visits from Dr. Octavius Graves with his leather bag of instruments and suffocating potions. Alara closed her eyes, trying to conserve what little strength remained in her withered body. The memories came unbidden, as they always did in the quiet moments before sleep. She was 10 years old again, running faster than any child in the Crescent Ridge pack. Her mother, Morgana Ashcroft, had stood on the training grounds, watching with a smile that seemed almost proud, almost warm. That was before the sickness started. Alara remembered the exact moment. It was 3 days after her 10th birthday. She'd been racing through the forest with the other pack children, her small lungs burning with exertion, her heart pounding with joy. Then suddenly, without warning, her legs had given out beneath her. She collapsed in the dirt, gasping, her vision swimming with black spots. The pack physician had examined her. He'd frowned, muttered something about delayed wolf manifestation, and sent her home with instructions to rest. But the exhaustion never went away. It grew worse, spreading through her body like poison, draining the color from her cheeks and the strength from her bones. At the same time, her younger sister Seraphine began to change. At 8 years old, Seraphine had been average in every way, pleasant enough but unremarkable. Then as Alara withered, Seraphine bloomed. She grew faster, stronger, more powerful with each passing month. Her aura, the supernatural energy that all werewolves radiated, became impossibly bright. By the time Seraphine was 9, she could outrun wolves twice her age. By 10, she could best grown warriors in combat trials. The pack called her a prodigy, a genetic miracle. The strongest female Crescent Ridge had seen in a century, and Alara was moved to the cellar. Morgana had explained it with cold, clinical efficiency. Alara was defective, a genetic failure, a human-born dud who brought shame to the purebred Ashcroft bloodline. She couldn't be allowed to contaminate the pack's reputation. The story given to the council was simple. Alara had been transferred to a specialized psychiatric facility in Maine. The paperwork was forged, the seals official looking enough to pass inspection. Dr. Graves had handled it all. In reality, Alara had been locked in the basement of her own childhood home. The heavy metallic thud of the deadbolts sliding back shattered the silence. Alara flinched, curling into a tighter ball, her skeletal arms wrapping around her knees. 3 distinct locks. Her mother never used fewer than 3. The iron-reinforced door swung open, casting a harsh, artificial beam of light down the wooden steps. Alara squinted against the brightness, her eyes having grown so accustomed to darkness that even the dim hallway bulb felt like staring into the sun. "Get up, Alara." Morgana Ashcroft's voice was sharp and aristocratic, cutting through the damp air like a blade. She descended the stairs with practiced precision, each step measured and deliberate. She wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit and a pair of Christian Louboutin heels that clicked ruthlessly against the floorboards. Her dark hair was pulled back in an immaculate chignon. She looked every inch the wealthy, powerful pack matriarch. Beautiful, untouchable, cold. She held a plastic tray containing a single bottle of generic water, 2 Tylenol pills, and a dry piece of toast. "I'm awake," Alara rasped. Her throat felt like it was lined with shattered glass. She struggled to push herself up, her joints popping and aching with a deep, unnatural arthritis that no 22-year-old should possess. Her hands trembled as she braced them against the concrete wall. "You will be absolutely silent tonight," Morgana ordered, stepping off the bottom stair, but keeping a safe, disgusted distance from her eldest daughter. She placed the tray on top of an old Coleman cooler that served as Alara's bedside table. The metal surface was covered in rust and water stains. "The Alpha King is arriving in less than an hour. He is auditing the Western Territories, and he is dining in our home tonight." Morgana's eyes, the same hazel as Alara's, were flat and emotionless. If you make a single sound, if you cough, if you drop a glass, if you so much as breathe too loudly through that vent, I will have Dr. Graves come down here and sedate you for a week." The name sent a jolt of pure terror through Alara's fragile system. Dr. Octavius Graves, he was the PAC's physician, the man who had forged Alara's medical records at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, claiming she had been transferred to a specialized permanent psychiatric care facility across the country. In reality, Dr. Graves was the one who came down to the cellar once a month with his leather bag of silver-laced instruments and dark, suffocating potions. Alara still bore the scars. She'd stopped counting after 73. Circular puncture marks clustered around her inner arms, her major veins. Some had healed into silvery white tissue. Others were still bruised and tender. She didn't know what he took from her. Only that each visit left her weaker, more hollow, as if something essential was being drained from her core. "I'll be quiet," Alara whispered, her eyes fixed on the concrete floor. She didn't have the strength to argue. She didn't have the strength for much of anything anymore. "You'd better be," Morgana sneered. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her jacket, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming in the dim light. "Tonight is Seraphine's night. King Kael is looking for an alliance, perhaps even a mate. Your sister is the strongest female this pack has seen in a century. Her aura is magnificent. She is perfection." Morgana took a step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "I will not have her ruined by the pathetic, wolfless embarrassment living under my floorboards." Wolfless, that was what Morgana told the pack. That Alara had been born without a wolf spirit, a genetic aberration so rare and shameful that she had to be hidden away. A dud, a failure of nature. But deep in Alara's chest, beneath the agonizing pain and the black veins, she felt something. A faint, desperate fluttering. A presence trapped behind walls she couldn't break through. It wasn't that she didn't have a wolf, it was that her wolf was buried, suffocating, screaming in a void she couldn't reach. Alara didn't argue. She didn't remind her mother that once long ago she had been the strong one. Before she turned 10, Alara had been the fastest, the brightest, the most vibrant child in the pack. The elders had whispered that she would be extraordinary, that her first shift would be something remarkable. They'd been right. But Alara never got the chance to prove it. "Drink your water, take your pills, and turn off that pathetic flashlight," Morgana commanded, turning on her red-soled heel. She marched back up the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. The door slammed shut behind her with a decisive bang. The deadbolts locked into place with a definitive clack, clack, clack. The darkness swallowed Alara whole. She sat in the silence for a long moment, listening to the faint sounds of activity above her head. The staff was rushing around, preparing the grand dining room. Footsteps thundered across the floor. Voices called out instructions. The entire household was in motion, getting ready to receive the most powerful werewolf in North America. Alpha King Kael Torven. Even locked in her cellar, Alara had heard the stories. Kael Torven was a legend. At 32 years old, he had ruled the North American territories for 8 years with an iron fist and an unwavering commitment to justice. They called him the Iron Judge because of his background as a federal prosecutor before he'd taken the throne. He was known for rooting out corruption with ruthless efficiency. 14 pack leaders had been arrested and convicted under his reign, their territories seized their assets, frozen, their crimes laid bare for all to see. He didn't believe in mercy for those who abused their power. He believed in evidence, in law, and accountability. Alara reached out with a trembling, heavily bruised hand to take the 2 painkillers from the tray. She swallowed them dry, the bitter taste coating her tongue. The water bottle remained untouched. She'd learned long ago to ration her supplies. Morgana only came down once a day, and the single bottle had to last. She pulled the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders and lay back down on the mattress. The springs dug into her jutting shoulder blades. Above her, the floorboards creaked and groaned as people moved through the house. She could hear the faint strains of classical music being tested in the sound system, the clink of crystal glasses, the low murmur of conversation as staff members coordinated the evening's schedule. Alara closed her eyes and wished for the one thing she always wished for: an end to the pain. A convoy of 4 pitch-black Cadillac Escalades rolled through the heavily guarded wrought iron gates of the Ashcroft estate. The rain battered against the tinted windows, washing away the mud of the mountain roads. In the back of the lead vehicle sat Kael Torven. At 32, he was the Alpha King of the North American territories, a man whose reputation was built on ruthless efficiency, unyielding justice, and a terrifying legendary physical power. He wore a bespoke dark navy suit that stretched over his broad, heavily muscled shoulders. His jaw was clenched, his slate-gray eyes staring out at the sprawling, ostentatious mansion looming in the stormy night. "We're here, sire," his beta, a scarred, stoic man named Thaddeus Ironwood, said from the front seat. "The Crescent Ridge Pack. The Ashcroft family is waiting on the porch." Kael exhaled a slow, weary breath. "Let's get this over with. The financial reports for this territory are a disaster. Embezzlement, missing funds, and rumors of unauthorized genetic experimentation. I want to look Morgana Ashcroft in the eye when she tries to lie to me." "And her daughter Seraphine?" Thaddeus asked carefully, his scarred face impassive. "The council has been heavily suggesting her as a suitable mate alpha. They say her power levels are unprecedented for a female of her lineage." Kael's lip curled in a silent growl. His inner beast, a massive, ancient, dominant wolf, rumbled in his chest with immediate distaste. The wolf had its own opinions, and they rarely aligned with political convenience. "I want our true mate," the wolf snarled in Kael's mind, the voice vibrating through his bones. "Not some council-approved breeding arrangement. I will make my own choices, Thaddeus," Kael said coldly, cutting off the conversation before it could continue. "I'm not interested in political pawns." The SUV stopped. The doors opened, and Kael stepped out into the freezing Washington rain. A pack enforcer hurried forward with a massive black umbrella, but Kael waved him off irritably, letting the rain hit his face. The cold water was grounding, cutting through the suffocating formality of these audits. He walked up the stone steps to the grand double doors of the estate, where Morgana Ashcroft stood flanked by her highest-ranking guards and her daughter Seraphine. Seraphine was undeniably beautiful in a manufactured, hyper-polished way. She wore a stunning emerald green silk dress that clung to her curves, and a heavy cloud of expensive Chanel No. 5 perfume hovered around her like a weapon. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in perfect waves. Her smile was practiced coy, designed to catch and hold male attention. But as Kael approached, his sharp senses picked up on something bizarre. Seraphine's aura was indeed massive, radiating a heavy golden energy that pressed against his supernatural senses like a physical weight. For a 20-year-old female, it was unprecedented, extraordinary, the kind of power that should take decades to cultivate. Yet to Kael's finely tuned alpha instincts, honed over years of prosecuting supernatural crimes, the energy felt wrong. It was jagged, uneven pulsing with irregular rhythms. It didn't fit her scent profile. Her natural scent beneath the perfume was pleasant but unremarkable. Light, floral. Nothing that should correlate with the crushing weight of the aura she was projecting. It felt like a magnificent coat tailored for someone else hastily draped over her shoulders. "Alpha King Torven." Morgana smiled, bowing deeply and exposing her neck in a gesture of submission. Seraphine did the same, though her bow was shallower, more practiced. She looked up, through her eyelashes offering a sultry smile. "Welcome to Crescent Ridge. We are honored to host you." "Morgana," Kael said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that made the surrounding guards tense involuntarily. The weight of his dominance was absolute. "Let's move inside. I have a long night of auditing ahead of me." The interior of the Ashcroft estate was lavishly decorated. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across marble floors. Long tables were laden with roasted meats, imported wines, and extravagant displays of wealth. Fresh orchids in crystal vases. Ice sculptures shaped like wolves. Servers in formal attire moving through the space with choreographed precision. It was a stark, almost obscene contrast to the poverty Kael had seen in the lower-ranking members of the Crescent Ridge Pack during his preliminary surveys in the nearby town. Families living in trailers, children in threadbare clothing. The territory taxes were supposed to fund infrastructure, education, healthcare for all pack members. Instead, the money had clearly gone into Morgana's mansion renovations and designer wardrobe. Kael was led to the head of the dining table. Seraphine immediately took the seat to his right, leaning in close, letting her cloying perfume wash over him. The scent was so strong it made his eyes water. "We've prepared a feast in your honor, King Torven." Seraphine purred, reaching out to lightly touch his forearm with perfectly manicured fingers. Her nails were painted deep crimson. "And afterward, I'd love to show you the estate grounds. We have a beautiful greenhouse. Perhaps you'd enjoy seeing it by moonlight." Kael subtly pulled his arm away, his expression remaining neutral, but his tone brooking no argument. "Well, I am here for business, Seraphine, not a tour." Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. As the dinner progressed, Kael systematically grilled Morgana on the missing territory taxes. $4.2 million over 3 years vanished from the accounts, with only vague expense reports to justify the withdrawals. Morgana dodged his questions with practiced ease, offering smooth, rehearsed explanations. Infrastructure improvements that hadn't been completed. Medical expenses for PAC members whose names she couldn't quite remember. Charitable donations to organizations that didn't seem to exist when Kael's team tried to verify them. She was lying. Kael could hear it in the slight elevation of her heartbeat, see it in the microscopic dilation of her pupils. But she was good at it, confident. She'd clearly done this before and gotten away with it. The air in the room was stifling. The food was excellent, prepared by professional chefs, but Kael barely tasted it. His attention was split between Morgana's evasions and the growing agitation of his wolf. The beast was pacing furiously inside his mind, slamming against the mental barriers that kept it contained. It wasn't just the lies that were driving his wolf insane. There was something else. Something in the air. A scent that didn't belong. Kael took a sip of his bourbon, closing his eyes briefly to focus his heightened senses. He filtered through the overwhelming smells of the dining room. Roasted venison, rich and gamey. Red wine, aged and complex. Fresh bread, yeasty and warm. Seraphine's suffocating Chanel perfume. And beneath it all, impossibly faint, drifting up through the floorboards like a ghost, was another scent. Petrichor. The smell of rain on dry earth. White lilies, pure and clean. And blood. Old decaying blood with an undertone of something sweet and desperate. Kael's wolf suddenly slammed against the front of his mind with such force that he nearly gasped aloud. The beast let out a deafening roar that reverberated through Kael's skull, a sound of desperate, overwhelming recognition. "Mate!" Kael's eyes snapped open. The slate gray of his irises bled away instantly, replaced by glowing predatory gold. The shift was involuntary, driven by the wolf's absolute certainty. His pupils elongated into vertical slits. His canines lengthened, pressing against his lower lip. The entire dining room fell dead silent. The silver cutlery stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. The servers froze in place, their hands trembling on the serving trays. The pack guards stationed around the room reached instinctively for their weapons, their bodies tensing in preparation for violence, terrified by the sudden spike of lethal, suffocating alpha aura radiating from the king. It was a pressure unlike anything most of them had ever felt. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on their chests, making it difficult to breathe. Weaker wolves dropped to their knees, their bodies unable to withstand the crushing weight of Kael's dominance. "Sire," Thaddeus asked, instantly on his feet despite the pressure. His hand moved to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. His scarred face was alert, scanning the room for threats. "What's wrong?" Kael didn't answer. He couldn't. His entire focus had narrowed to a single point. The scent. It was calling to him, pulling at something deep and primal in his chest. His wolf was no longer pacing. It was throwing itself against the mental barriers with single-minded desperation, demanding to be released, demanding to find the source of that scent. Down below, muffled by thick carpets and layers of concrete, a faint thud vibrated through the floor. The sound of a glass jar knocked over by a trembling hand. To the humans and weaker wolves in the room, it was nothing. Background noise. Meaningless. To Kael, with his alpha-enhanced hearing, it sounded like a gunshot. His head snapped toward the floor, his glowing golden eyes fixing on a spot near the base of the grand staircase. The scent was coming from there, from below. Someone was down there, someone who was dying, whose blood was old and rotten, whose body was failing. Someone who was his. Who was under the floor, Kael growled. His voice had changed, vibrating with an inhuman resonance that made the crystal chandeliers overhead rattle in their fixtures. It was the voice of the wolf, bleeding through, raw and unfiltered. Morgana's perfectly powdered face instantly drained of color. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her composure shattering for the first time since Kael had arrived. I beg your pardon, Alpha. There is no one. Just the wine cellar. Storage. Nothing of concern." Kael didn't wait for her to finish. He stood up so fast that his heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the floor with a thunderous bang. The sound echoed through the dining room like a judge's gavel. His hands slammed down on the table, cracking the hardwood surface beneath his palms. "Alpha King, please," Seraphine cried out, jumping to her feet and trying to grab his arm. Her perfectly composed mask had slipped, revealing genuine panic underneath. "There's nothing down there, just rats and old storage. Let me take you upstairs. We can—" Kael didn't even look at her. He simply unleashed a wave of raw, dominant alpha command. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was pure instinct, his wolf taking control, clearing obstacles from their path. The sheer force of his aura hit Seraphine and Morgana like a physical blow. Both women gasped, their eyes rolling back as their bodies were driven to their knees by the crushing pressure. their hands clutched at their throats, their lungs struggling to draw breath against the supernatural weight pressing down on them. The pack guards around the room instantly dropped to the floor as well, their weapons clattering from nerveless fingers. They lay flat on their stomachs, their foreheads pressed to the marble, completely unable to stand against the king's unbridled power. Some were whimpering, others had passed out entirely. "Thaddeus," Kael barked, his voice still carrying that inhuman resonance. "Secure the room. No one leaves. If anyone tries to run, stop them. Use whatever force necessary." "Yes, Alpha." Thaddeus responded immediately, his tone crisp and professional despite the pressure. As Kael's beta, he had built up a tolerance to his Alpha's dominance over years of service. He moved through the room efficiently, positioning himself between the door and the collapsed forms of Morgana and Seraphine. Following the agonizingly sweet, desperate scent of rain and dying lilies, Kael marched out of the grand dining room. His footsteps were heavy, purposeful, each one echoing through the suddenly silent mansion. He stalked down a lavishly carpeted hallway, his glowing golden eyes scanning the architecture with predatory focus. There, tucked beneath the grand staircase, almost hidden by the ornate woodwork, was a heavy oak door. It was locked. 3 heavy steel deadbolts and a massive industrial padlock secured it from the outside. Kael stopped in front of the door, his chest heaving. His wolf was howling now, a continuous sound of rage and desperation. Who put 3 deadbolts on the outside of a wine cellar? His human mind observed with cold clarity. This wasn't storage. This was a cell. They were keeping someone prisoner. They were keeping her in a cage. Kael didn't bother looking for the key. He didn't waste time demanding that Morgana come and open it. He grabbed the heavy brass handle with his right hand, braced his boots against the doorframe and pulled. Wood splintered with a deafening crack. Metal shrieked and groaned. The deadbolts tore free from the frame, the screws ripping through oak like it was paper. The hinges bent, then snapped. With a violent jerk, Kael ripped the entire door out of its reinforced frame, the heavy slab of oak and iron coming free in his hands. He threw it down the hallway behind him, where it crashed against the wall and shattered into pieces. A wave of cold, damp, rancid air washed over him. The smell of bleach, sickness, and deep, profound suffering hit his nose like a punch. But beneath it all, stronger now that the barrier was gone, the scent of his mate called to him, pure and undeniable. Rain and lilies, and something uniquely, perfectly her. Kael descended the wooden stairs, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His chest was tight with a rising panic he hadn't felt in decades. The basement was pitch black, lit only by the weak beam of light spilling from the hallway above. As his werewolf vision adjusted to the darkness, the shadows peeled away, revealing a horror that made the Alpha King's blood freeze in his veins. In the corner, lying on a filthy, stained mattress that should have been thrown away years ago, was a fragile skeletal figure. "No," Kael whispered, his voice breaking. The sound was raw, stripped of all the authority and power he usually carried. It was the voice of a man confronted with something that violated every instinct he possessed. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides and dropped to his knees on the freezing concrete floor. The cold seeped through his expensive suit pants immediately, but he didn't notice. All of his attention was focused on the woman curled up on the mattress. She was pressing herself violently into the corner, her arms thrown over her head, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. She was incredibly thin, her cheekbones sharp and hollow. But what horrified Kael wasn't just the starvation, it was the evidence of systematic torture. Dozens of circular scars clustered on her inner arm's injection sites. He counted them with his enhanced vision. 73 visible marks, each one a testament to years of abuse. "Please," she whimpered, her voice entirely ruined, sounding like torn paper rubbed against concrete. "I was quiet. I swear I was quiet. Don't let Dr. Graves come. Please. I'll be good. I'll be so good." "I am not Dr. Graves," Kael said, forcing his voice to be softer than anyone in his kingdom had ever heard it. He moved slowly, carefully, his massive, calloused hand hovering over her trembling shoulder. "Look at me, sweetheart. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." The woman flinched at his touch, but slowly, hesitantly lowered her arms. She looked up. Her eyes were a striking, beautiful hazel flecked with gold and green. They were the only part of her that still held life, still held fire. Despite everything that had been done to her, despite the obvious years of torture and neglect, her eyes were defiant. Terrified, yes, exhausted beyond measure, but not broken. The moment their eyes locked, the mate bond snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike. It was a brilliant, explosive rush of warmth, belonging, and soul-deep recognition. The sensation hit Kael like a freight train driving the air from his lungs. Golden sparks ignited in the air between them, visible even in the darkness, crackling with supernatural energy. The bond was a living thing, a connection that bypassed logic and reason and went straight to the most primal part of his being. Mine, his wolf, howled in triumph and agony. Ours. Protect. Heal. Ours. The woman gasped, her back arching slightly off the mattress as the bond tried to push life back into her withered body. The connection flooded her system with warmth, with energy, with the promise of healing. For a brief, shining moment, color bloomed in her sunken cheeks. Her pupils dilated. Her lips parted in shock. But as the bond flared and settled, Kael's enhanced vision caught something else, something that made his blood turn to ice. Through the supernatural connection of the mate bond, his eyes pierced the physical realm and saw the ethereal. Attached to the center of the woman's chest, buried deep where her wolf spirit should reside, was a thick, pulsating cord of dark, sickly purple magic. It was a tether writhing like a living parasite, its surface covered in symbols that Kael recognized from his years prosecuting supernatural crimes. An Aaron siphon, a forbidden dark magic spell used to drain life force, magical energy, and genetic power from one individual and transfer it to another. Kael had seen it once before in Baltimore in 2015. The victim had been a young alpha male whose pack had been using him as a battery to power a collective enhancement spell. By the time Kael's team had found him, the man was already dead, his body at a hollow husk. Kael followed the cord with his eyes tracing its path through the ceiling. It extended upwards, snaking through the floorboards straight toward the dining room above, straight into the seat where Seraphine had been sitting. The realization hit Kael with devastating clarity. This woman wasn't sick. She wasn't a genetic failure. She was an immensely powerful werewolf, perhaps one of the strongest females born in a century. But for her entire life, her mother and a dark practitioner had been siphoning her life force, her wolf, her innate power, draining it directly into Seraphine to create an artificial prodigy. They had locked the true diamond in the dark and stolen her light to polish a piece of glass. What? What are you? The woman breathed, staring at his glowing golden eyes. Her voice was barely audible, each word clearly causing her pain. But she was looking at him with a mixture of terror and desperate, aching hope. She could feel the bond too. She just didn't understand what it meant. I am Kael, he whispered gently, brushing a matted strand of dark hair from her freezing cheek. As his skin made contact with hers, another shower of golden sparks ignited between them, the mate bond singing with recognition. The woman let out a soft, confused sob at the feeling. It was clearly the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, that someone had touched her with kindness. I am the Alpha King, Kael continued, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. And you, my beautiful, brave girl, are my fated mate. Mate, she whispered, a single tear slipping down her hollow cheek. The words seemed to unlock something in her, a recognition buried deep beneath years of conditioning and abuse. No, I'm dying. I'm broken. You can't. I'm nothing. You are not broken, Kael growled softly, the sound vibrating through his chest. He slid his arms beneath her fragile frame, with infinite care cradling her against his body. She weighed almost nothing. It broke his heart. You were stolen from, but I am here now, and I swear to you on my life, on my crown, and on the moon goddess herself, I am going to give you back everything they took. He stood up carefully, holding his mate against his broad chest as if she were made of spun glass. He pulled his tailored suit jacket off with one hand and wrapped it securely around her freezing body. The fabric swallowed her so large on her emaciated frame that she looked like a child. The dark siphoning tether of magic pulsed angrily in the air, responding to the disruption. But Kael's own massive golden aura surged forward instinctively, wrapping around his mate like a shield. His power was immense, honed over years of training and battle. It crashed against the parasitic spell like a tidal wave, aggressively cutting off the flow of stolen energy. The woman gasped as a sudden tiny rush of her own strength stayed inside her body for the first time in over a decade. It wasn't much, just a trickle, but it was hers, and the sensation of keeping her own power even for a moment made her eyes go wide with shock. Kael looked up at the ceiling, his golden eyes burning with an apocalyptic fury that would have sent weaker men running for their lives. His wolf was no longer howling. It had gone silent, calculating and cold. The beast had found its mate tortured and broken, and now it wanted blood. It wanted justice. It wanted to tear apart everyone responsible with teeth and claws and leave their bodies as a warning. And then, Kael said quietly, his voice carrying a promise of absolute destruction, I am going to burn this house to the ground. Holding his dying queen against his heart, the Alpha King turned and began the walk up the stairs, ready to show the Ashcroft family exactly why he was called the Iron Judge. The heavy rhythmic tread of Kael's boots on the wooden stairs sounded like the tolling of a death knell. In his arms, Ilara felt lighter than a child, her brittle bones pressing through paper-thin skin against his chest. Yet to Kael, she was the center of gravity. His entire world had collapsed down to the fragile woman cradled against him, her shallow breathing the only sound that mattered. He kept his massive golden aura wrapped tightly around her, a protective cocoon of raw alpha power that actively fought back against the freezing dampness of her skin and the parasitic pull of the dark magic tether still embedded in her chest. Every step he took, he could feel the spell trying to reassert itself, trying to drain her. But his power was older, stronger, and fueled by a primal rage that made the air around them crackle with electricity. As he reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the hallway, the scene before him was frozen in terror. Thaddeus and the royal guards had completely secured the perimeter of the dining room. The pack guards who had served the Ashcroft family lay face down on the marble floor, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. They weren't trusted. Not anymore. Anyone who had worked in this house and not noticed a woman dying in the basement was either complicit or criminally negligent. Morgana Ashcroft was still on her knees where Kael's Alpha Command had driven her. Her immaculate charcoal pantsuit was wrinkling against the hardwood floor, and her carefully styled hair had come loose from its chignon. Strands fell around her face in disarray. Her eyes were wide with a dawning localized panic as she saw what Kael carried in his arms. Seraphine was beside her mother, but something had drastically changed in the brief minutes Kael had been in the basement. Without the continuous feed of Ilara's life force and raw power, Seraphine's magnificent golden aura was violently flickering. The fabricated strength that had made her the pride of the Crescent Ridge Pack was evaporating like morning mist under a blazing sun. She looked paler, her posture sagging. Her hands trembled where they pressed against the floor. Her breathing was labored, panicked, as if she'd just run a marathon. The emerald dress that had clung so perfectly to her curves now seemed to hang loose, as if her body itself was shrinking. "Alpha King?" Morgana gasped, her voice cracking. She stared at the bundle wrapped in Kael's suit jacket, and when she caught sight of the hollow blackened face of her eldest daughter, resting against the king's chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror escaped her throat. Please, you don't understand. She is sick, contagious, a blight on our bloodline. You must put her down before silence." Kael's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it vibrated through the crystal wine glasses on the dining table until one shattered with a sharp musical ping. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet like a gunshot. He walked slowly toward the center of the room, each step deliberate and measured. Ilara had buried her face into the crook of his neck, overwhelmed by the harsh lights of the chandelier, the rich smells of the feast, and the terrifying presence of her mother. Kael could feel her trembling against him, her small hands clutching weakly at his shirt. He subtly shifted his hold, pressing her closer, letting his steady heartbeat ground her. For 12 years, Kael began his golden eyes locking onto Morgana with the intensity of a predator staring down trapped prey. "You told the council that Ilara Ashcroft was transferred to the Silverwood Psychiatric Institute in Maine. You forged medical documents. You signed death certificates for her wolf. You reported her as a genetic failure, the human-born dud who brought shame to your bloodline." He stopped in the center of the room, directly beneath the largest chandelier. The light cast his shadow across Morgana and Seraphine like a blade. "It was to protect the pack," Morgana cried out, tears of desperation streaking her expensive makeup. Black mascara ran down her cheeks in ugly tracks. She was weak. She was defective. A pack needs strength, Alpha King. A pack needs a leader like Seraphine. My youngest daughter is powerful, gifted, extraordinary. She is what our bloodline was meant to produce. Seraphine, Kael spat the name like venom. He shifted his gaze to the younger sister, and what he saw there was pathetic. The woman who had been so confident, so sultry and composed just 30 minutes ago, was now trembling violently. She was clutching her stomach as if she might vomit, her skin clammy with cold sweat. "Seraphine is nothing but a parasite wearing a stolen crown," Kael said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel through flesh. "That's a lie," Seraphine shrieked. Her voice had lost its melodic, practiced purr, turning shrill and desperate. She tried to push herself to her feet, but collapsed back to her knees, her legs unable to support her weight. "I am the strongest female in the Northwest. The council certified it. I've won every trial, every competition. I am your equal, King Torven. Kael didn't let her finish. He didn't need to argue with delusions. Instead, he reached out with his free hand, the one not supporting Ilara, and materialized his alpha energy into the physical realm. It sparked around his fingers like golden lightning, crackling and hissing in the air. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees as supernatural power condensed into visibility. With a swift, brutal, slashing motion through the air, Kael physically severed the invisible ethereal cord that connected Seraphine to Alara. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Seraphine let out a blood-curdling scream, her back arching unnaturally as the Aaron siphon spell, suddenly cut off from its source, snapped back on the user. The backlash was catastrophic. The heavy golden aura that had surrounded her, the power that had made her legendary, instantly shattered, like glass struck with a hammer. The fragments of stolen energy dissipated into the air, dissolving into nothing. The backlash of the broken spell hit Seraphine's nervous system like a freight train. Her body convulsed, muscles seizing in uncontrollable spasms. She fell forward onto her hands and knees, retching violently. Blood trickled from her nose and the corners of her eyes. The supernatural withdrawal was tearing through her system, punishing her for 12 years of artificial enhancement. The rich, overwhelming scent of alpha power that had surrounded Seraphine vanished entirely. In its place was the weak, sour smell of an average, low-ranking wolf. Barely above human, she had no alpha blood. She never had. Every ounce of dominance, every demonstration of strength, every victory in combat had been ripped from Alara's veins and pumped into Seraphine like a drug. The pack guards watching the scene gasped in collective shock. Some were weeping openly, horrified by the revelation. Others looked sick, their hands covering their mouths. The deception was laid bare for all to see. "She has no alpha blood," Kael announced to the room, his voice echoing with absolute authority. The weight of his judgment was final, irrevocable. Every ounce of speed, every drop of power, every accolade she has ever won was ripped from the veins of your true future alpha. "From my fated mate." Morgana screamed, a sound of pure maternal anguish. She crawled toward her writhing youngest daughter on her hands and knees, her designer clothes dragging across the floor. "What have you done? You've ruined her." "We only did what Dr. Graves suggested. He said the magic would stabilize the pack. He said it was for the greater good." "Thaddeus," Kael ordered, turning his back on the pathetic display. His beta stepped forward instantly, his scarred face a mask of lethal professionalism. "Yes, sire." "Arrest Morgana and Seraphine Ashcroft for high treason, the use of forbidden dark arts, and the attempted murder of a royal mate." Kael's voice was cold, clinical, the voice of a prosecutor reading charges in a courtroom. "Strip them of their pack status. They are rogues as of this second. Confine them separately. No contact with each other or anyone outside this estate until the tribunal." He paused, his jaw tightening as he looked down at Alara. She was so still in his arms, her breathing shallow and irregular. Time was running out. "And find Dr. Octavius Graves." Kael continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I don't care if he's hiding in the deepest bunker in this territory. I want him alive. He has information I need, and he will give it to me before he faces judgment." "It will be done, King Torven," Thaddeus replied, gesturing to the royal guards. They moved forward with silver-forged handcuffs, the kind specifically designed to suppress werewolf strength and healing. The metal glowed faintly with runic inscriptions as they snapped the cuffs around Morgana's and Seraphine's wrists. Morgana was screaming obscenities, now her cultured facade completely shattered. Seraphine was sobbing, begging, promising anything if they would just give her back the power. The withdrawal was clearly agonizing, her body going through the supernatural equivalent of cold turkey from a 12-year addiction. Kael didn't spare them another glance. He strode out of the grand double doors and into the rain. The storm was still pouring in sheets, the wind howling through the tall pines surrounding the estate. Kael's remaining guards had already brought the armored Escalade around. The engine was running, heat blasting from the vents. Thaddeus opened the back door and Kael slid inside, still cradling Alara against his chest. "Drive." "Now," Kael commanded the driver, a massive enforcer named Wyatt, who had served in his security detail for 6 years. "Get us to the royal compound at Mount Rainier. Contact Dr. Lysander Vale immediately. Tell him to have the intensive trauma unit prepped and waiting. This is a severe dark magic extraction protocol. He'll know what that means." "Yes, Alpha," Wyatt responded, his hands already gripping the steering wheel. The convoy tore out of the Ashcroft estate, the tires kicking up massive plumes of mud and water. The gate guards barely had time to open the wrought iron barriers before the SUVs roared through. In the back seat, Kael laid Alara across the plush leather seats, keeping her head cradled in his lap. He brushed her dark, brittle hair away from her face with gentle fingers. Without the dim lighting of the cellar obscuring his view, the true extent of her physical deterioration was agonizing to witness. Her skin was paper-thin, each vein visible beneath the surface. Her lips were blue, tinged with oxygen deprivation. Her fingernails were cracked and yellowed. Malnutrition had ravaged her body so completely that she looked decades older than her 22 years. Suddenly, Alara gasped, her back arching off the seat. A horrific wet cough ripped through her chest, and a line of thick black blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. The substance was viscous, unnatural, carrying the metallic tang of dark magic corruption. Kael's stomach dropped. He recognized what was happening. The Aaron siphon spell hadn't just stolen Alara's power. It had been artificially keeping her body alive, maintaining her organs, just functional enough that she could continue to be harvested. The spell had acted like a parasitic life support system. With the tether now severed, 12 years of physical neglect, starvation, and abuse were hitting her system all at once. Her organs were shutting down in rapid succession. Alara, Kael said, his voice laced with a terrifying edge of panic he rarely allowed himself to feel. He cupped her face in his large hands, tilting her head so he could look into her eyes. Alara, stay with me. Open your eyes. Look at me. It hurts, she whimpered, her hazel eyes rolling back, the light fading rapidly from them. Her pupils were dilating unevenly, a sign of neurological distress. The dark. It's coming back. I can't fight it. Kael didn't need a heart monitor to track what was happening. His heightened alpha hearing could detect the frantic, irregular fluttering of her pulse in her neck. It was slowing down, weakening. Her heart was giving out. No, Kael growled, his wolf rising to the surface, refusing to accept defeat. You are not dying today. I just found you. You are not leaving me. He didn't have time to wait for Dr. Vale and the medical team at the compound. They were still 40 minutes away, and Alara didn't have 40 minutes. She barely had 4. Werewolf healing was incredibly fast, capable of closing gunshot wounds in hours and broken bones in days. But Alara's wolf was still locked away, buried under layers of trauma and residual dark magic that would take weeks to fully clear from her system. She couldn't heal herself. She needed an external catalyst. She needed an influx of pure, unadulterated life force. Kael made a decision that would have been unthinkable under any other circumstances. He brought his right wrist to his mouth. With a sharp, violent bite, he pierced his own flesh with his fully extended fangs. The pain was immediate and intense, but he ignored it. His canines tore through thick muscle and major veins, and instantly rich, glowing, crimson blood welled up from the wound. The blood of an Alpha King wasn't just blood. It was liquid power, heavily concentrated and with regenerative cells, supernatural antibodies, and dominant magic that could heal wounds no hospital could touch. It was the reason Alpha blood was so valuable on the black market, worth tens of thousands of dollars per ounce. A single transfusion could save a dying wolf, cure diseases, even temporarily enhance strength. Drink, little one, Kael urged, pressing his bleeding wrist to Alara's pale lips. His blood dripped onto her mouth, staining her cracked lips crimson. Alara was too weak to move, too weak to understand what was happening. She groaned softly, trying to turn her head away from the metallic copper smell. Her instincts, dulled by years of abuse, were telling her that blood meant pain, meant doctor. Graves and his needles. Please, Alara, Kael pleaded, his voice softer than it had ever been. He tilted her chin up gently with his free hand, letting a few drops of his blood fall past her lips and onto her tongue. For me. Trust me. Please. The moment the alpha blood hit her tongue, a violent shudder racked Alara's frail frame. Her dormant instincts, starved and suppressed for over a decade, suddenly flared to life with explosive force. It was a biological imperative hardwired into every werewolf's DNA. The scent and taste of a fated mate's life force triggered a primal response that bypassed conscious thought. Her body recognized what it needed to survive, and it demanded more. With a sudden, desperate gasp, Alara's hand shot up and clamped around Kael's forearm with surprising strength. Her fingers dug into his skin, holding his wrist in place as she pressed her mouth to the wound and began to drink greedily. Kael gritted his teeth, not from the pain of the bite, but from the overwhelming rush of sensation as the mate bond actively solidified. He could feel his blood entering her system, racing through her veins, fighting a war against the toxins and dark magic residue that had accumulated over 12 years. It was like watching two armies clash inside her body, his power burning away the corruption with ruthless efficiency. Color, a very faint but unmistakable flush of pink, began to bloom on Alara's sunken cheeks. The horrific black veins that had webbed her neck and arms started to recede, shrinking back beneath her skin like retreating snakes. The thick, pulsing lines faded to dark purple, then to gray, then to nothing. Clean, healthy skin emerged in their wake. That's it, Kael whispered, stroking her matted hair with his free hand as she continued to drink. His own head was beginning to spin slightly from the rapid blood loss, a dizzying sensation that he hadn't felt since he was a young wolf in training. But he didn't care. He would drain himself dry if it meant she survived. Take what you need, Alara. Take all of it. The dark blood that had trickled from her mouth was gone, replaced by the faint golden glow that always accompanied alpha blood transfusion. Her breathing was deepening, becoming even and steady, instead of the shallow, gasping pants that had racked her chest moments before. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, Alara slowly pulled back. Her lips released his wrist, and she slumped back against the leather seat, her chest rising and falling with deep, regular breaths. Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, Kael saw clarity in them. The hazel irises were clearer now, less clouded by pain and approaching death. Kael, she whispered, her voice still raspy but sounding less like torn paper and more like an actual human voice. There was wonder in her tone, and confusion, and a fragile, desperate hope. I'm here, Kael said quickly. He wrapped a clean cloth from the SUV's emergency kit around his wrist, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. His accelerated healing had already begun to close the wound, but it would take a few minutes. He pulled Alara up against his chest, wrapping both arms securely around her. You're safe, I've got you. My chest, Alara murmured, pressing one skeletal hand over her heart. Her fingers splayed across the fabric of his suit jacket that still swaddled her. It feels warm, like something is moving, like there's something alive in there. Kael smiled, a genuine, relieved expression that transformed his usually stern features into something almost gentle. That is your wolf, Alara. She's waking up. She's been waiting for you for a very long time. Alara closed her eyes, leaning into the hard, protective warmth of his chest. For 12 years, she had lived in an icy hell, convinced she was a broken, useless thing. Defective, a mistake of nature that deserved to be hidden away. Now wrapped in the arms of a king who had torn down doors to find her, who had given her his own blood to keep her alive, she felt a tiny flickering spark of something she thought was dead forever. Hope. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning splitting the dark sky. But inside the armored vehicle speeding toward the sanctuary of the mountains, the darkness was finally giving way to the first light of dawn. The royal compound at Mount Rainier was a fortress carved into the living rock of the mountain itself. The main structure was built from native stone and aged timber designed to blend seamlessly into the rugged Pacific Northwest landscape. It sprawled across 15 acres of heavily forested land, protected by both physical security and supernatural wards that would repel any unauthorized approach. By the time the convoy arrived, Dr. Lysander Vale and his medical team were waiting in the underground entrance bay, gurneys and equipment already staged. The doctor was a tall, distinguished man in his early 40s with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He wore surgical scrubs under a white coat, and his hands were already gloved. Thaddeus briefed me, Dr. Vale said as Kael emerged from the SUV with Alara still cradled in his arms. The doctor's eyes widened fractionally as he took in her condition, but his professional composure held. Aaron Siphon, 12-year duration, mother goddess. I've only read about cases this extreme in historical texts. Most victims don't survive past 5 years. She's survived, Kael said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. And she's going to keep surviving. Tell me you can help her. I can stabilize her, doctor. Vale replied, gesturing for his team to follow as he led the way into the medical wing. But I'll need to put her in a medically induced coma for at least 2 weeks, possibly 3. Her body is in severe shock from the sudden absence of the siphon. We need to give her organs time to remember how to function independently while we flush the residual dark magic from her system. They moved through sterile hallways lined with advanced medical equipment. The Royal Compound's infirmary was state-of-the-art, funded by territory taxes, and equipped to handle everything from combat injuries to supernatural poisoning. They had resources here that most pack hospitals could only dream of. Kael carried Alara into the prepared intensive care suite. It was nothing like the cold clinical hospital rooms of human facilities. The walls were painted in warm earth tones. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the breathtaking snow-capped peaks of Mount Rainier. Even at night, with only moonlight illuminating the landscape, the view was stunning. Lay her here, Dr. Vale instructed, indicating the specialized medical bed. It was equipped with monitors, IV stands, and a complex array of sensors designed to track both physical and supernatural vital signs. Kael hesitated for just a moment before gently lowering Alara onto the bed. She made a small sound of protest as he pulled away her hand, weakly grasping at his shirt. Don't leave, she whispered, her eyes pleading. Please don't leave me alone. I don't want to be alone anymore. I'm not going anywhere, Kael promised, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. He pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, and golden sparks danced across their joined skin. The mate bond hummed with warmth and reassurance. I'll be right here when you wake up. I swear it, Doctor. Vale moved efficiently, inserting IV lines and attaching monitoring equipment. I'm going to administer the sedative now, he explained, his voice calm and professional. You'll feel very tired, and then you'll sleep. When you wake up, you're going to feel much better. I promise. Alara's frightened eyes found Kael's one more time. He squeezed her hand gently, pouring every ounce of reassurance he could into the mate bond. Sleep, little one, I'll keep watch. The sedative took effect quickly. Alara's eyelids grew heavy, and within 30 seconds she slipped into unconsciousness. Her breathing evened out immediately, the monitors showing a steady if weak heartbeat. Dr. Vale worked for the next 2 hours running blood tests, taking tissue samples, and setting up the specialized IV drip that would sustain Alara during her coma. The fluid in the bag glowed faintly blue, a mixture of synthetic nutrients, alpha blood plasma donated from the Royal Blood Bank, and purified magical energy harvested from natural ley lines. Her baseline vitals are catastrophic, Dr. Vale reported as he reviewed the initial test results on his tablet. Kael stood beside Alara's bed, refusing to sit, refusing to leave her side, even for a moment. Severe anemia, kidney damage, liver damage, muscle atrophy, bone density, loss. Her body has been cannibalizing itself to stay alive. She should be dead alpha. The only reason she's not is because the siphon spell was keeping her just functional enough to continue the harvest. Can you heal her? Kael asked, his voice tight. Yes, Dr. Vale said with quiet confidence. It will take time, months possibly. But she's strong, stronger than she has any right to be after what she's endured. Her wolf is still there. I can sense it, just buried under layers of trauma and magical suppression. Once we clear the residual dark magic, her natural healing should accelerate the recovery process dramatically. Kael nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Good. Do whatever you need to do. Cost is not a concern. If you need specialists flown in from Europe or Asia, make it happen. If you need rare materials or experimental treatments, I'll authorize it. She gets the best care available. Understood, Alpha. As Dr. Vale left to coordinate with his team, Kael pulled a leather chair close to Alara's bedside. He sat down heavily, the exhaustion of the evening finally catching up with him. But even as his body demanded rest, his mind refused to shut down. There was too much to do, too many questions that needed answers. Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Sire, we have a situation. Kael looked up, his eyes flashing gold in warning. What kind of situation? Dr. Octavius Graves, he's gone. By the time our team reached his registered address in Port Angeles, the house was empty. Cleaned out, no forwarding information. We're tracking his known associates now, but it looks like he ran the moment you arrested Morgana and Seraphine. Kael's jaw clenched. Put out an all-territory alert. I want his face on every packboard from Alaska to Florida. Offer a reward. $5 million for information leading to his capture alive. $10 million if he's delivered directly to the compound. Done, Thaddeus confirmed. There's more. I contacted Agent Rowena Sterling with the FBI Supernatural Crimes Unit. She's been investigating Graves for years, ever since a similar case in Baltimore in 2015. She's requesting permission to join the investigation. Granted, Kael said immediately. If she has intel on Graves, I want it. Schedule a meeting for tomorrow evening. I want to know everything she knows about his operation. Yes, Alpha. Thaddeus hesitated, his scarred face showing rare uncertainty. And the High Council they've been calling, repeatedly. Senator Cassius Draven is demanding an explanation for why you arrested 2 prominent PAC members without consulting the council first. Kael's lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Draven can wait. I'll deal with the council after I have all the facts. Right now, my priority is her. He gestured to Alara's sleeping form. The council wanted me to choose a political mate. Well, they got their wish. They just didn't expect her to be the woman they helped bury. Thaddeus nodded slowly, a dark smile crossing his features. This is going to be a bloodbath, sire. Good, Kael said coldly. I'm in the mood for one. Over the next 3 weeks, Kael barely left Alara's side. He worked from her room, conducting territory business via secure video conference. He slept in the leather chair beside her bed, refusing offers of a more comfortable arrangement. He ate meals brought by staff, though he barely tasted the food. His entire focus had narrowed to the woman lying unconscious before him and the investigation that was slowly, methodically building the case that would destroy everyone responsible for her suffering. Dr. Vale reported progress daily. The dark magic residue was being flushed from Alara's system, though the process was slow and delicate. Her organs were beginning to heal, showing improvement in function. Her weight was increasing incrementally as the IV nutrients rebuilt her wasted muscle mass. Meanwhile, Thaddeus and Agent Sterling were constructing a comprehensive picture of Dr. Graves's operation. The warlock, it turned out, had been working with Morgana Ashcroft since 2010, shortly after Alara's 10th birthday. Financial records seized from the Ashcroft estate showed monthly payments of $350,000 to a shell company called Crescent Biogenetics LLC. The company was registered in the Cayman Islands, but the money trail led back to Graves' private lab, hidden in the mountains near the Oregon border. The lab had been raided on day 5 of the investigation. What they found inside was damning. 87 vials of concentrated alpha essence, each labeled with Alara's initials and a date. Extraction logs detailing 142 separate procedures over 12 years. Dr. Vale would later explain that while 142 extractions had occurred, only 73 left permanent scarring. The rest had been taken from sites that healed completely due to residual werewolf biology, making the abuse even harder to detect. Medical equipment designed specifically for genetic manipulation. And most damning of all, a series of encrypted emails between Graves and someone using the codename Raven. Agent Sterling's cybercrimes team had cracked the encryption on day 12. Raven was Senator Cassius Draven, a senior member of the High Council. The emails painted a clear picture of conspiracy. Draven had known about the Aaron siphon from the beginning. In fact, he'd helped fund it, transferring $8 million to Graves's offshore accounts over the course of the operation. The reason was chilling in its cold pragmatism. Draven and his faction on the council had never trusted Kael. The Alpha King had come to power through merit in combat trials, not through political maneuvering. He couldn't be controlled. He couldn't be bought. So Draven had hatched a plan to create a controllable alternative. A powerful female alpha enhanced with stolen White Crescent genetics who could be married off to a more pliable male alpha and eventually positioned to challenge Kael's rule. Seraphine had been groomed from childhood to be a puppet queen. The emails also revealed something even more disturbing. If Kael ever discovered the truth about Alara Draven had authorized Protocol Omega, eliminate the source, destroy all evidence, and frame Kael for gross negligence in allowing a dangerous illegal experiment to occur in his territories. They had been planning to kill Alara and destroy Kael's reputation in one move. Kael read the decrypted emails alone in Alara's room late on the 17th night. His hands shook with barely controlled rage as he absorbed the casual cruelty of the conspiracy. These weren't rogue criminals. These were respected leaders, people who were supposed to protect the pack structure, who had instead turned a child into a battery for their political ambitions. "I'm going to end them," Kael said quietly to Alara's sleeping form. She couldn't hear him, but saying it out loud made it a vow. "Every single one of them. I'm going to drag them into the light and make them answer for what they did to you." On the morning of the 21st day, as dawn light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows and painted the snow-capped peaks of Mount Rainier in shades of gold and rose, Alara's eyes opened. The rhythmic, steady beep of a state-of-the-art heart monitor replaced the dripping water of the cellar. The air smelled of sterile cotton, expensive lavender oil, infused into the ventilation system, and the deep, intoxicating scent of rain and pine that Alara now instinctively knew was Kael. When Alara finally opened her eyes to the world, it wasn't to a cracked ventilation grate filtering weak secondhand light. It was to expansive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the breathtaking snow-capped peaks of Mount Rainier. Sunlight, real warm, unfiltered sunlight, spilled across the foot of her plush hospital bed like liquid gold. She blinked slowly, her mind struggling to process the scene. The last thing she remembered was Kael's face above hers, his golden eyes blazing with fierce protectiveness, as he'd whispered promises she'd been too weak to fully understand. Now she was in a room that looked nothing like any hospital she'd imagined. It was beautiful, peaceful, safe. "You're awake." The deep, exhausted voice rumbled from her right. Alara turned her head, the movement easier than it should have been, and found Kael sitting in a leather chair pulled so close to the bed that it was touching the mattress. He looked as though he hadn't slept in weeks. Dark circles framed his eyes, now returned to their natural slate gray. A heavy shadow of stubble covered his jaw. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits she'd seen him in before. But the moment his eyes met hers, his entire face softened into an expression of absolute reverence. "How long?" Alara rasped. Her voice was no longer the ruined whisper it had been in the cellar, though it still held the gravel of disuse. She was surprised by how much clearer it sounded. 3 weeks, Kael said gently, reaching out to take her small hand in his massive one. He brought it to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her knuckles. The golden sparks of the mate bond danced across their skin, sending a rush of comforting warmth straight to her core. Dr. Lysander Vale had to put you in a medically induced coma. Your body was in severe shock from the sudden absence of the Aaron siphon spell. We had to feed you a specialized IV drip of alpha blood plasma synthetic nutrients flown in from Swedish Medical Center in Seattle in purified magical energy just to stabilize your organs. Alara absorbed this information slowly, her mind still foggy from the long sleep. She looked down at her arms and her breath caught in her throat. The terrifying blackened veins were completely gone. Her skin, once translucent and bruised, now held a healthy peachy-toned flush. There was a faint silvery scar on the inside of her wrist where the IV had been, but underneath it, she could feel the strong, steady thrum of her pulse, real and alive in hers. "I feel heavy," Alara whispered, bringing a hand to her chest. The sensation was strange, unfamiliar. For as long as she could remember, she'd felt hollow like a shell with nothing inside. "You feel full," Kael corrected, his eyes burning with a pride that made her chest tighten. "You've been hollowed out since you were a child's sweetheart. The Aaron siphon is a parasitic spell. It didn't just drain your physical stamina. It was actively suppressing and consuming your wolf's spirit to feed your sister." At the mention of Seraphine, Alara flinched involuntarily, pulling her hand back slightly. Decades of conditioning and fear didn't vanish in 3 weeks of unconsciousness. The deeply ingrained terror of her mother's wrath, of Dr. Graves's needles, of Seraphine's casual cruelty still lived in her bones. Kael noticed the shift immediately. He stood up, leaning over the bed to cup her face gently with both hands. His palms were warm, calloused, strong. "Safe. They are in the holding cells, Alara," he said, his voice firm but tender. "Maximum security, silver-lined, separate locations. They will never ever hurt you again. I promise you that, on my life." "Why?" The word escaped before Alara could stop it. She looked up at Kael, confusion and disbelief warring in her hazel eyes. "Why did she do it? Why did my mother hate me so much?" The door to the private suite opened before Kael could answer, and Dr. Lysander Vale stepped inside holding a glowing tablet. He was tall and distinguished, with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that softened when they landed on Alara's awake form. "Ah, our patient has returned to us," Dr. Vale said warmly. He approached the bed with the confident ease of a man who had spent decades in medicine. "Welcome back, Miss Ashcroft. How are you feeling?" "Confused," Alara admitted. "But better, stronger." "Excellent," Dr. Vale said, making notations on his tablet. "If I may, Alpha King, I believe Miss Ashcroft deserves to know the truth about her condition. The full truth." Kael nodded, stepping back to give the doctor room, but keeping one hand firmly clasped around Alara's. The mate bond hummed between them, a constant source of warmth and reassurance. "Doctor." Vale tapped his screen, and suddenly a holographic genetic tree materialized in the air above the bed. The projection was composed of glowing blue lines and nodes branching out like the roots of an ancient tree. Names appeared beside various nodes, tracing bloodlines back through centuries. "We extracted comprehensive genetic data from your blood samples," Dr. Vale explained, using his finger to highlight specific branches on the tree. "And what we found was extraordinary. You see, Queen Alara, your mother didn't hate you because you were weak." The title Queen Alara made her freeze. She opened her mouth to protest, but Dr. Vale continued. "She hated you because you were a threat." He zoomed in on a particular branch of the genetic tree, and a name appeared in glowing letters: White Crescent bloodline. "Our tests revealed an anomaly in your DNA. You do not just carry the standard Crescent Ridge lineage. You are a genetic throwback to the original White Crescent bloodline, a legendary dominant female lineage thought to be extinct since the 1820s. Alara stared at the hologram, her mind struggling to process the words. "I don't understand." Kael's hand tightened around hers. The White Crescent wolves were the most powerful female alphas ever recorded in North American history. He explained, his voice rough, with barely controlled emotion. They were queens in their own right, not just mates to kings. They could command entire territories. Their auras were strong enough to challenge even the most dominant males, and they possessed unique abilities that other wolves didn't have. Healing, enhanced empathy, the power to bind pack loyalty through sheer force of presence. They were also politically dangerous, Dr. Vale added, his tone turning clinical, because a White Crescent female didn't need a male alpha to rule. They could and often did take power in their own right. The bloodline was systematically eliminated in the 1820s during the Great Territorial Wars because the male-dominated packs feared their influence. But you survived, Kael said, looking at Alara with an intensity that made her heart race. Somehow, against all odds, the White Crescent genetics skipped generations in your family line and manifested in you. Your mother knew. She had your blood tested when you were born. She knew that the moment you shifted at 16, your power would completely eclipse hers. You would have naturally taken the alpha position from her, bypassing her favored child, Seraphine. The realization settled over Alara like a heavy blanket. So when you were 10 years old, Dr. Vale said, his voice gentle but firm, Dr. Octavius Graves bound your wolf with dark magic. The Aaron Siphon spell was designed to do two things: suppress your natural abilities so you could never shift and manifest your full power, and extract that power to transfer it into another vessel. In this case, your sister. The hologram shifted, showing a visualization of the spell's mechanism. Purple tendrils extending from a small figure representing Alara, feeding into another figure representing Seraphine. They used your immense latent power as a battery, Kael growled, his wolf rising close to the surface. His eyes flashed gold briefly before he forced the beast back down. They siphoned your White Crescent strength and funneled it directly into Seraphine, fabricating a prodigy to secure their family's absolute grip on the Western territories. And when you started to die from the drain, they locked you away so no one would discover what they'd done. Alara felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, pure crystalline fury. For 12 years, she had believed she was a mistake of nature. She had endured the freezing cellar, the starvation, the isolation, the monthly visits from Dr. Graves with his needles and his cold clinical efficiency, all because she thought she deserved it for being defective. But she wasn't broken. She was stolen from. Where is Dr. Graves? Alara asked, her voice hardening. The sound of it surprised even her. It carried an edge she'd never heard before, a steel core that had been buried under years of abuse. Kael's expression darkened. He escaped before we could apprehend him, but we've issued a continent-wide alert. Every pack from Alaska to Florida is looking for him. He can't hide forever. When we find him, and we will find him, he will answer for his crimes. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing pain erupted at the base of Alara's spine. She gasped, her back arching off the pillows. It felt like someone had driven a white-hot spike into her lower back, and the sensation was rapidly spreading upward along her vertebrae. What's happening? She cried out, her hands clutching at the sheets. The pain was intensifying, her bones beginning to heat up from the inside, vibrating with an intensity that made her teeth chatter. It's time, Doctor, Vale said quickly, stepping back from the bed, but keeping his tablet raised to monitor her vital signs. Her wolf is fully healed. The residual dark magic has been cleared from her system. She's breaking through the final psychological barrier. She needs to shift alpha. Kael didn't hesitate. He swept Alara out of the hospital bed in one smooth motion, cradling her against his chest. She was still thin, still recovering, but she was so much stronger than she'd been 3 weeks ago. He could feel the power building inside her, pressing against her skin like a living thing trying to break free. He sprinted out of the glass doors of the medical suite and onto the massive, sprawling balcony that overlooked the dense pine forests of Mount Rainier. The crisp, freezing mountain air hit Alara's overheated skin like a shock of cold water, and the sensation acted as a profound catalyst. The pain in her spine exploded outward, racing through her entire skeletal system. She could feel her bones preparing to reshape her muscles, coiling with supernatural energy. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Let her out, Alara, Kael commanded, his voice vibrating with his own alpha frequency. The sound resonated through her chest, giving her permission on a primal level to shatter the cage that had held her wolf captive for 12 years. Show them who you are. Show them what they tried to steal. With a guttural, tearing scream that echoed across the valley and sent flocks of birds exploding from the trees below, Alara surrendered completely to the fire raging in her veins. The shift was agonizing. 12 years of atrophy and magical binding had to be broken all at once. Her bones snapped and realigned with audible cracks. Her spine elongated, her jaw restructured. Muscle expanded across her frame, filling in the emaciated hollows. Her hands and feet, elongated fingers fusing and reshaping into massive paws tipped with razor-sharp claws. But it was also the most euphoric release Alara had ever experienced. It was like breaking through the surface of water after being held underwater for so long, she'd forgotten what air tasted like. Every cell in her body sang with recognition, with homecoming, with finally being complete. When the blinding silver light of her transformation faded, Kael stood in absolute awe. Before him was not the frail dying girl he'd found in a cellar 3 weeks ago. Standing on the balcony was a massive, breathtakingly beautiful timber wolf. Her coat was pure, iridescent white, shimmering like spun moonlight even in the bright afternoon sun. Each strand of fur seemed to glow with an inner light, creating a halo effect around her body. She was nearly as large as Kael's own beast, easily 5 feet at the shoulder, with powerful muscles rippling beneath her luminous coat. She radiated a pure, untainted, overwhelmingly dominant aura that made the very air hum with electricity. It was the aura of a queen, of a White Crescent alpha who had finally, after 12 years of imprisonment, claimed her birthright. Alara turned her massive head, and her eyes, now a piercing, otherworldly silver, locked onto Kael. She let out a long, triumphant howl that shattered the silence of the mountains. It was a sound of pure survival, of defiance, of a spirit that had been beaten down but never broken. The howl echoed across the valleys, bouncing off the stone faces of the peaks, carrying for miles. Every wolf within hearing distance would feel it in their bones. The White Crescent had returned. Kael shifted instantly in response. His own transformation was swift and practiced bones and muscle reshaping in seconds. His massive midnight black wolf stepped forward, easily matching Alara's size. Where she was silver light, he was shadow. Where she was moonlight, he was the dark of the new moon. He pressed his muzzle against hers in the traditional gesture of mate recognition, and a shockwave of combined power rippled outward from where they touched. Gold and silver auras intertwined, creating a brilliant display of supernatural energy that lit up the balcony like a beacon. For the first time in her life, Alara felt whole. The High Council Tribunal Room was not a place designed for comfort. It was a subterranean cathedral of absolute unyielding justice. Carved deep into the impenetrable granite bedrock beneath the Mount Rainier compound, the cavernous amphitheater was designed to make those who stood within its center feel entirely insignificant, utterly exposed, and completely at the mercy of those who sat in judgment. The air was thick and heavy with the scent of ozone, ancient magic, and the metallic tang of deep earth. Floating magical braziers burned with a cold, smokeless, blue flame, casting long, dramatic shadows against the tiered stone seating that rose high into the darkness. The acoustics were perfect, engineered over centuries to ensure that every word spoken in the center of the floor would carry to every corner of the chamber with crystal clarity. Every alpha from the North American territories had answered the Alpha King's summons. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the sweeping galleries, over 400 powerful men and women cloaked in formal pack regalia. Territorial banners hung from the stone walls representing every major pack from the Arctic Circle to the Gulf of Mexico. Yet despite the presence of hundreds of dominant werewolves, a suffocating pin-drop silence reigned over the chamber. They were not there to debate or advise. They were there to bear witness to the wrath of a king whose fated mate had been desecrated. In the direct center of the sunken stone floor, anchored to the bedrock itself by heavy silver-forged iron rings, knelt three figures. The reversal of their fortunes was profound and absolute. Seraphine Ashcroft, once the golden child and the manufactured pride of the Crescent Ridge pack, looked entirely unrecognizable. Stripped of the dark magic that had artificially sustained her unnatural aura, she had physically and spiritually withered over the 3 weeks of Alara's recovery. Her once lustrous dark hair hung in thin, greasy strands around a sallow, hollowed-out face. She trembled violently against her heavy chains, her skin slick with cold sweat. She was scratching frantically at her own arms, her fingernails leaving bloody tracks as her body suffered the agonizing withdrawal of 12 years of stolen life force. She was a hollow vessel, terrified of the emptiness inside her own chest. Beside her knelt Morgana Ashcroft, the corrupt matriarch who had orchestrated a decade of torture. She no longer wore her immaculate tailored suits or her mask of aristocratic superiority. She was dressed in the coarse, abrasive gray canvas uniform of a convicted traitor. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where she had fought against the silver shackles during the first days of her imprisonment, though she had long since given up struggling. She kept her chin tipped upward in a pathetic, desperate attempt to hold on to her shattered dignity, but the erratic panic darting of her eyes betrayed the absolute terror consuming her mind. To their left knelt Dr. Octavius Graves, captured 4 days ago in Prague when greed trumped loyalty. Unlike the Ashcrofts, who still clung to denial, Graves had already surrendered. His hands shook with palsy. His gaze never left the stone floor. A man waiting for the axe to fall. Suddenly, the massive iron-reinforced oak doors at the apex of the amphitheater let out a deafening groan as they were pushed open by the royal guards flanking the entrance. "All rise for Alpha King Kael Torven." Thaddeus Ironwood's voice thundered through the cavernous space, amplified by the acoustics of the stone, until it seemed to rattle the very bones of everyone present. and his fated mate, Queen Alara of the White Crescent. The reaction was instantaneous and absolute, as the entire assembly of prideful, powerful alphas dropped to a synchronized knee, their heads bowed in submission, exposing the vulnerable lines of their throats. It was the highest gesture of respect in werewolf culture, and the sight of 400 alphas kneeling in perfect unison was breathtaking. When Alara stepped over the threshold and into the blue light of the braziers, a collective audible gasp rippled through the rows of lowered heads. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. She was no longer the fragile, dying girl who had been hidden in the damp, windowless dark of a cellar for 12 years. She was a vision of terrifying, radiant majesty. She wore a sweeping, elegant gown of deep midnight blue silk that pooled like liquid shadows around her feet. The fabric moved like water with each step, catching the blue flame light and shimmering. But it was not the dress that commanded the room. It was the sheer, crushing weight of her aura. The White Crescent lineage, thought to be extinguished by time and violence 200 years ago, flared to life within the ancient chamber. Alara's presence was dense, palpable, shimmering with an ethereal silver light that was so overwhelmingly powerful it pushed the breath from the lungs of the weaker wolves present. The aura didn't just announce her dominance. It sang, it proclaimed, it demanded acknowledgement from every supernatural being in the room. She did not walk. She seemed to glide, moving with the lethal, fluid grace of an apex predator who was perfectly comfortable in her dominance. Her dark hair, now glossy and healthy, cascaded down her back in loose waves. Her hazel eyes, once clouded with pain and approaching death, now blazed with silver fire. Her hand rested firmly in Kael's, their fingers intertwined. Kael walked beside her, every inch the Alpha King. He was clad in formal royal armor, dark hardened leather reinforced with steel plates across his chest and shoulders. His slate-gray eyes had been entirely swallowed by the glowing predatory gold of his inner beast. His own aura blazed around him like a corona of power. Their auras, Alara's silver and Kael's gold, bled together as they descended the sweeping stone steps, intertwining in the air to create a physical, blinding manifestation of an unbreakable supreme alliance. The combined weight of their power was so immense that several of the younger alphas in the lower tiers began to shake their bodies, struggling to withstand the pressure. Kael guided his queen to the twin obsidian thrones positioned at the head of the tribunal floor, elevated on a dais of black stone. The thrones were ancient, carved from single pieces of volcanic glass and etched with runic symbols of authority and judgment. As they took their seats, Kael looked down at the wretched figures chained in the center of the floor. His eyes were completely devoid of mercy, cold and calculating as a blade. Morgana Ashcroft, Seraphine Ashcroft, Octavius Graves. Kael's voice was cold, lethal, and echoed off the stone walls like the definitive strike of a judge's gavel. You stand before the High Council of the North American Territories. You are charged with the highest, most abhorrent crimes against our kind. He gestured sharply to Thaddeus, who stepped forward from his position beside the thrones. The beta unrolled a heavy wax-sealed parchment, his scarred face grim, as he prepared to read the formal charges into the official record. Thaddeus's voice boomed across the chamber, each word falling like a hammer blow. High treason for the falsification of medical documents, perjury before the royal court, and the manipulation of territorial genetic records with intent to deceive the High Council. The practice of forbidden arts for the unauthorized continuous use of the Aaron siphon, spell a dark magic explicitly banned under the Covenant of 1847. Attempted regicide for the prolonged systematic physical and psychological torture and the attempted murder by neglect of Queen Alara Ashcroft, acknowledged fated mate to Alpha King Kael Torven. And finally, theft of lineage for the malicious binding and siphoning of the sacred White Crescent bloodline with intent to artificially manipulate the pack hierarchy and create an unauthorized genetic weapon. Thaddeus rolled the parchment and stepped back, his duty complete. The silence that followed was heavier than the stone surrounding them. You took 12 years of my mate's life, Kael stated, leaning forward slightly. His massive hands gripped the armrests of his throne and the obsidian creaked under the pressure. You locked the true rightful heir of Crescent Ridge in a windowless, concrete box to rot, to starve, and to suffocate on her own stolen magic simply so you could parade a fraud in the sunlight and maintain your grip on power. She is my daughter, Morgana finally snapped. The silence had broken her. Her carefully maintained composure shattered like cheap glass as she stared up at Alara with a twisted mixture of terrified awe and deeply ingrained resentment. I gave her life. I carried her for 9 months. I had the right to shape her destiny, to shape the future of my pack. A pack needs a leader they can understand, not an anomaly of ancient, dangerous magic. Council humiliated me 30 years ago, said Ashcroft, Blood was too weak. I swore my child would be strongest. You surrendered the absolute right to call yourself her mother. Alara spoke for the first time, and her voice cut through the chamber like a blade through silk. The second you locked the deadbolts on that cellar door. Her voice was calm, smooth, and melodic, yet it was layered with the heavy, unyielding command of an ancient alpha queen. The sound alone was a physical force, striking Morgana so hard that the woman flinched violently, shrinking back against her chains as if she'd been slapped. Alara stood from her throne and descended the dais steps with measured grace. She walked toward the center of the floor, and every eye in the chamber tracked her movement. When she stopped directly in front of her mother, the contrast was stark. Morgana chained and broken on the cold stone. Alara standing tall and radiant in her midnight blue gown, backlit by the silver glow of her own aura. You did not break me, Morgana. Alara continued, her silver eyes boring into her mother's with laser focus. You only delayed me, and in your pathetic attempt to steal my light, you proved exactly how powerless you truly are. Kael rose from his throne, the movement drawing every gaze. He descended to stand beside Alara, presenting a united front. He raised his right hand, and the air in the tribunal room grew instantly bone-chillingly cold. His alpha command washed over the assembly like a tidal wave, and even the strongest alphas in the upper galleries felt their wolves submit involuntarily to the sheer dominance radiating from their king. The sentence is absolute, and it is final. Kael decreed, his voice carrying the weight of divine judgment. Octavius Graves, you will spend the rest of your natural life in the silver-lined, lightless, solitary confinement wings of the Iron Ridge Supernatural Penitentiary. Your magic is hereby permanently bound by order of this council. You will live out your days as a mundane prisoner, haunted by the ghosts of the power you abused and the lives you destroyed. Graves let out a broken, wheezing sob. He collapsed forward until his forehead struck the freezing stone floor, with a dull thud, accepting his damnation without protest. Senator Cassius Draven, arrested 2 days prior and currently held in maximum security, you are found guilty of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and funding illegal genetic experimentation. The sentence is death by silver at dawn. Your house assets are forfeit to the crown. Your bloodline is stripped of all titles and territories. You will be remembered only as a warning. A murmur rippled through the assembled alphas. Execution was rare, reserved for the most heinous crimes against the throne. But no one protested. The evidence was absolute. As for you, Morgana and Seraphine Ashcroft, Kael turned his terrifying gaze to the mother and daughter, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Death would be a quick, merciful release. It is far too lenient for what you subjected my queen to endure. He raised both of his hands, channeling a terrifying, suffocating amount of pure alpha energy. The braziers flared brighter, their blue flames turning white hot. The air vibrated, humming with the frequency of his wrath. You valued power above all else. You valued status, the pack bond, and supernatural superiority. You worshipped strength and looked down upon those you deemed weak. So I am stripping you of every single thing you hold dear. With a swift, brutal, downward slashing motion, Kael struck them both with a localized, concentrated blast of dominant suppression that was so powerful, so absolute, that several alphas in the front rows had to look away from the spiritual violence of it. Morgana and Seraphine threw their heads back and screamed. The sound was horrific, guttural, a noise of profound spiritual agony that no physical torture could replicate. It was the sound of souls being torn apart. The punishment was visceral and terrible to witness. Kael was not simply commanding them into submission. He was actively, permanently severing the ethereal ties that connected their human consciousness to their inner wolves. The sacred bond that every werewolf was born with, the connection to their beast that defined their very identity, was being ripped away by force. The faint, pathetic remnants of their auras, Morgana's dull brown and Seraphine's hollow gray, shattered like cheap glass struck with a hammer. The fragments dissolved into nothingness. The profound, comforting hum of the pack, the connection that allowed wolves to sense each other's emotions and intentions, was violently severed. The inherent supernatural strength of their biology, the heightened senses that let them see in darkness and hear whispers from a mile away, the accelerated healing that closed wounds in hours, all of it was stripped away, leaving a gaping, agonizing void in their souls where their wolves had once lived. They were now, for all intents and purposes, entirely human, mortal, fragile, powerless. You are hereby permanently banished to the mortal realm. Kael's voice rang out over their continued weeping and screaming. You have no wealth. All Ashcroft assets are seized by the crown and will be distributed as reparations to those harmed by your crimes. You have no titles, you have no magic, and you have no wolves. He leaned down, his face inches from Morgana's tear-streaked, contorted features. You will live out the remainder of your short human lives as the weak, powerless, utterly defenseless things you truly are. And you will know every single second of every single day that the daughter you threw away in the dark now rules the very ground you walk upon. No, please, goddess, no! Seraphine shrieked, her hands clawing at her own throat as if she could physically reach inside and pull her wolf back. The terrifying, absolute quiet of a human mind, no second consciousness, no beast offering strength and counsel, was settling over her like a suffocating blanket. I can't be human. I can't survive out there. I am a Sullivan. I am special. I am... You are nothing, Alara said softly, her voice carrying across the amphitheater with perfect clarity despite its quiet delivery. The words were entirely devoid of pity, of anger, of any emotion at all. Just cold absolute fact. But you will have time to learn humility now. Kael gave a sharp nod to Thaddeus and the royal guards. They stepped forward immediately, unlocking the iron rings that had anchored the prisoners to the floor, but keeping the heavy silver chains bound tightly around their wrists and ankles. The guards began to drag the three prisoners backward across the stone floor toward the rear exit that led to the holding cells and transport vehicles. Morgana was screaming obscenities now, her cultured aristocratic facade completely obliterated. She hurled vile curses at Alara, at Kael, at the council, her voice raw and animalistic despite no longer having a wolf. Seraphine was begging incoherently, promising anything, everything, if they would just give her back the power. The withdrawal from 12 years of stolen energy was clearly agonizing on a level that transcended physical pain. Dr. Graves was simply weeping softly, his body limp, as the guards dragged him along. The heavy oak doors at the rear of the chamber swung open, revealing the dark corridor beyond. The guards pulled the prisoners through the threshold, and the doors slammed shut behind them with a definitive echoing boom. The iron deadbolt slid into place with that same sound Alara had heard every day for 12 years, clack, clack, clack. But this time she was on the other side of the door. This time she was free, and they were caged. The silence that rushed back into the tribunal room was heavy, but for the first time in over a decade it was a clean silence. The rot had been excised from the pack structure. The poison had been drawn out and disposed of. Kael slowly turned his back to the now empty center of the floor and looked up at Alara, who had remained standing near the dais. The cold, unyielding fury that had hardened his features during the sentencing melted away, entirely replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of pure devotion and relief. He crossed the distance between them and, ignoring the 400 watching alphas, knelt gracefully before his queen. He took her small hands in his massive ones, his golden eyes meeting her silver gaze. "The dark is gone, my queen," Kael murmured, his voice rough with emotion. He pressed a reverent kiss to her palms, and the golden sparks of their bond danced brightly in the shadows of the ancient chamber. "Only the light remains." Alara smiled. It was a genuine, breathtaking expression that reached all the way to her bright hazel eyes, transforming her face from merely beautiful to absolutely luminous. She pulled her mate up to his feet and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the warm, steady crook of his throat. She breathed in his scent, rain and pine and home, and felt the last of the 12-year nightmare finally release its grip on her soul. "I'm free," she whispered against his skin, and the words were both a statement and a prayer of gratitude. "I'm finally free." The assembled alphas, still kneeling in respect, began to rise. And then, starting from the upper galleries and spreading like wildfire through the chamber, they began to howl, not in grief or rage, but in celebration, in acknowledgement, in welcome. The White Crescent had returned, and she had brought justice with her. 6 months later, Alara stood on the balcony of the royal compound, her hands resting on the stone railing as she looked out over the valley below. The sun was setting, painting the snow-capped peaks of Mount Rainier in shades of rose gold and deep purple. When Dr. Vale had confirmed the pregnancy 6 weeks ago, Kael had dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to her still flat stomach, and wept. She'd never seen him cry before. He'd whispered promises to their unborn child, promises of safety, of freedom, of a world where no one would ever steal their light. Now the slight swell of her belly was just beginning to show beneath the soft cashmere sweater she wore. 3 months pregnant, a White Crescent heir, the first in 200 years. The healers had confirmed that the baby was strong, healthy, and already showing signs of incredible supernatural power. Kael emerged from their private quarters and wrapped his arms around her from behind his large hands, settling protectively over her stomach. He rested his chin on top of her head, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. What are you thinking? Kael asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. 12 years in the dark, Alara said quietly. She placed her hands over his, their fingers intertwining. And now I have infinity in the light. Our child will never know a cage, Kael promised, his voice fierce with protective certainty. They will grow up free, powerful, and loved. Everything you should have had. In the valley far below, two wolves, one midnight, black one, iridescent white, raced through the forest in perfect synchronization. They had hunted together just an hour before taking down an elk with coordinated precision. Now they were simply running for the joy of it, muscles stretching, hearts pounding completely and utterly free. Alara turned in Kael's arms and looked up at him. In the fading light, his slate-gray eyes were soft, filled with a tenderness that he showed to no one else in the world. Thank you, she whispered, for opening the door. You walk through it yourself, Kael replied, cupping her face gently. I just gave you the chance. Everything after that. That was all you, my beautiful queen. He kissed her, then slow and deep, as the last rays of sunlight gilded them both in gold. Behind them, through the open doors, a document sat on Kael's desk, awaiting final signatures. It was titled the White Crescent Protection Act legislation that would make it illegal across all North American territories to suppress alpha genes, mandate third-party oversight for all medical treatments involving genetic manipulation, and establish harsh penalties for anyone who attempted to recreate what had been done to Alara. The law would save lives. It would protect the vulnerable. It would ensure that no child would ever again be locked away and drained for someone else's gain. Alara's legacy wasn't just her own survival. It was the system she and Kael were building together brick by brick, law by law, to ensure that justice wasn't just an ideal, but a guarantee. As night fell over Mount Rainier, the Alpha King and his White Crescent Queen stood together on their balcony, silhouetted against the stars. They were powerful. They were united. And they were finally completely at peace. The dark had given way to dawn, and the light would never fade again.